And greetings, welcome back to another Perspectives chat. And what's on my mind? Well, I think it's a subject I've talked about before, and it was re-triggered because the other day I watched the first episode of a new TV series called The Last of Us. And some people may be familiar with it. It's a new TV adaptation of a very popular video game that came out several years ago, and I think it was so successful because of its narrative structure as well. And it was about in an apocalyptic future after a virus had decimated society. There was a young girl who seemingly her blood was resistant to the virus, and so this group of renegades wanted to take this child across country, across America, to their other base and to medically examine her and to get the cure for the virus. And so this father who'd lost his own daughter was entrusted with escorting this young girl across the wild wastelands of zombie infested America to protect this girl. Now the idea, the meme or the trope of that is nowadays quite common. If you tell that story to someone, they say, "Oh, I think I've seen that," because it's been repeated in various ways. There's been various zombie films like I, Legend with Will Smith, that was again an adaptation from the book, which I think in the film version the main character wanted to protect again a girl because she was resistant to the virus. And the reason why I watched this episode was because the TV series had been very highly positively reviewed, saying it's one of the best adaptations from a video game. And when I watched it, I watched the first episode only. But really what made me think again was, and I've talked about this before, is predictive programming. In the last 10 years especially, but even going back further, in the last 15 years, very easily, our mediascape has been swamped with these ideas of virus turning people into zombies. We had the very, well executed film from Steven Soderbergh called Contagion, not that long ago, well, maybe again 10 years ago, which is a very eerie forerunner to what happened in 2020 with the COVID situation and our pandemic. But if you look at the what's been coming of our media screens and entertainment in the last 10-15 years, then it's just quite telling how we've had this consistent, persistent, overwhelming entertainment of this meme of these virus decimating human society and the survivors ravaging. I mean, even the franchise, there's that zombie franchise which will come to me in a minute, but it was from a video game which then became a very popular series with Mila Jovanovic, I think. But you know about it. It's again with the Umbrella Corporation and releasing viruses as experiments. If it comes to me, you see, this was not totally planned, but if it comes to me, I'll let you know. But actually, I talked about these predictive programming memes in a chapter from my book Hijacking Reality, which is subtitled The Reprogramming and Reorganization of Human Life. And this came out in literally 2 years ago, February of 2021, which was very short after the events of the pandemic in 2020. And I noticed immediately that what was going on was a reprogramming of our narratives and reality structure. And in fact, in chapter 3, I called it Prophesizing Media or Predictive Programming. And I refer to these as dystopian memes. I mean, I even go back and look at the non-fiction books which have dealt specifically with long-term catastrophism, which is catastrophes using the climate and related, and even going back 20 years to the well-known book by Martin Rees in 2003 called Our Final Century. Martin Rees was the astronomer royal in the UK. So his book, The Final Century, was looking at the possibilities that for humanity this is our final century. But also all talk about risk and violence, titles like With Speed and Violence from 2007, The Next Catastrophe, again 2007, World at Risk, Ulrich Beck 2009, The Great Disruption 2012, Convergence of Catastrophes, I mean, The Next World War 2005. Even these non-fiction books, which are supposedly serious academic or investigative journalism, looks at all these potential risks and catastrophes. But I think what's more telling is what comes into the popular media that gets commercialized as entertainment, because this more easily slips beyond the conscious filters in our minds and into our subconscious. And I just looked, I mean, this is again just a few books and or films from the last 20 years. I mean, going back to Cormac McCarthy's The Road, which is a very dark book. The book was in 2006 and the film in 2009. Of course, we have Margaret Atwood's work, also her 2003 book, Oryx and Crake. We have The Children of Men, which the book was 92, but a very well adaptation, 2006. We have The Year of the Flood, 2009, The Book of Ellie, 2010, the Hunger Games book and film franchise. We have Snowpiercer, which was the film originally and then the series, not so good. The Giver, book and film, in book of 93, film 2014. Automata, film 2014. The Maze Runner books and film franchise. Of course, the Mad Max franchise, and the last film in that, Mad Max Fury Road in 2015. Ready Player One, The Testaments. And it goes on and on. And of course, then those books are kind of catastrophe, apocalyptic scenario. But then in the last, again, 10 years, the zombie meme, again, too many to list. I listed a few, the main ones, The Walking Dead, The Last Ship, Z Nation, Fear the Walking Dead, iZombie, Santa Clarita Died, Black Summer, Daybreak, Dead Set, Kingdom, Reality Z. I mean, the list goes on and on. It's just, there's been so many of these zombie brain-eating series and films come out on mainstream commercial media. It's what I've called the apocalypse-pathogen-virus-zombie-endgame meme. Bit of a mouthful, but the whole thing's a bit of a mouthful. The apocalypse-pathogen-virus-zombie-endgame meme. And I quoted here the Italian philosopher Franco Berardi, because he kind of saw this as well. He said, art, poetry, narration, music and cinema trace a landscape of imminent darkness, social de-evolution, physical decay, and neuro-totalitarianism. The artscape of the new century seems crowded with dystopian imaginings, depressing descriptions of the present, and frightening scenarios of the imminent time to come. And so I think he's right, I mean, spot on. Social de-evolution, neuro-totalitarianism, this attack on our minds by thrusting at us these ideas And so in this latest video game adaptation series, The Last of Us, the idea is this is a fungi infection, which then takes over the host body and spreads by passing on the spores. And of course, every human host then has to devour other humans to spread. So it's, getting quite, I suppose, tedious that this is on all the time. So what this notion of predictive programming does to us through television, it's, if you take the step back, why is the predictive programming? Because it's the question about the nature of reality. And reality is not fixed. It's a participatory reality that responds to the wavelengths, i.e. the consciousness of the human being that goes out into the wavelength environment and participates in creating or establishing certain aspects of this reality, and we experience them. So, of course, if you are a group of a few people, call them the elite or the cabal or the syndicate, if you are a small group, relatively speaking, and you wish to steer the narrative in a certain direction, then you can't do it alone because you don't have the resources. The resources is our minds, human consciousness. So you need to get into our heads, quite literally. And I wrote about this in my previous book, The Struggle for Your Mind, Conscious Evolution and the Battle to Control How We Think. If they can get into your minds and program you in a certain way to project or anticipate or to perceive in a certain way, then that influences how reality becomes established. So we're doing the hard work for the small group, So we are the hosts in effect, and this elite cabal is the fungi who are getting into our heads and trying to program us to spread the spores of dystopian memes. And so if we can understand and accept the nature of reality and how we are involved and participate in that, then it makes us take greater responsibility for the programming we put into our heads, or the food we ingest, and how we process and digest that information coming in. So it's all about information. If you can control the information coming in, you have greater ability to anticipate or manipulate what type of information is being coded out into reality. And it's not just the zombie memes. This pathogen-zombie-endgame meme type of programming is, undeniably connected with us having a fear over pathogen and biological invasion into our bodies, and then of course that sets us up to be more susceptible, more vulnerable to a real life situation if that unfolds, which it has done. Of course, there's other kind of tropes or memes which are very present in modern programming. The other one is the contact with other life in the universe, and there's like the Stargate franchise and many more films, how contact is established, and so we get used to understanding that we are interacting with other species, but there's always a negative element to that. Most likely there's an undercurrent whereby, in the Stargate's a military operation. They have a military, the whole narrative about the military dealing with these other species, and some are friendly, but you have to be careful because there's others which are negative. And in most contact scenarios, there's a negative undertone, or it may start pleasant, like the V franchise, which first came out quite a few decades ago, and it was remade about 15 years ago. You know, the V, where they come as friendly humans, but underneath they're reptilians. And you know, even in Battlestar Galactica, which was a very successful franchise again 15, 20 years ago, quite dated now, but very well executed at the time, how humanity is being always attacked by these AI cyborg entities, which are never friendly. And it's basically a war for human survival. So it's all this negative underlying. So of course, if there is a contact scenario that comes about in the future, we already have the suspicions and the fear programmed into us quite strongly, which can be passed on generational. And so the programming is to steer people into a certain access of information, whilst at the same time denying access to other information. And that's quite crucial, is that if we are being steered and orientated in this direction, it's because they don't want information over here to be accessed. And in antiquity, the way that they took away access was quite brutal physically, such as the Library of Alexandria in Egypt, which was supposed to be the depository of, the largest depository of knowledge in the world at the time. And that was burnt down deliberately, arson. And then also when you have these conquerors that go into indigenous nations, the first thing they do is destroy the ancient knowledge and the wisdom traditions, such as when Cortez went into South America, destroyed the wisdom traditions of the tribes and the civilizations that were living in South America. And again, this is a pattern. The conquerors destroy the information and the wisdom of the people they are conquering to then replace it with their own narrative. And and the same with wisdom traditions. This is why in the past wisdom traditions went underground, were very carefully guarded. Initiates were very carefully chosen. Sometimes the wisdom streams were disguised within an unorthodox stream, so they, for their survival. And we see this again in the last few centuries with alchemy and hermeticism, and some of them had to go underground and others had to dissipate and then re-guise themselves in a new disguise, in a new environment. And so, and of course, any information which was seen as going against the mainstream narrative was heretical. And in the past, you had institutions which were deliberately set up to destroy any heretical knowledge, i.e. anything which went against the mainstream programming. Of course, we know that we had the Spanish Inquisition, and that was a major institution to destroy any wisdom, not just the burning of witches, because there was word about decentralized, on the ground, localized wisdom traditions, but of course you had the martyrdom of people like Giordano Bruno, who was trying to, his science and his philosophy and his mysticism of trying to share that. So basically the Inquisition and similar groups and institutions that destroy any heretical in their terms information, is a form of censorship. And we have that now, of course. And we have that now in the last 2 years, especially. The form of censorship has been accelerated, so it's undeniable. And so we get these so-called fact checkers, which are just groups being set up by the same status quo institutions that are trying to maintain the narrative. I mean, fact checkers, it's a joke. And so they're saying this information is good and this information is bad. This is misinformation. This is correct information because it you know, we know the story. Um, so this is a form of censorship. It's a form of inquisition, but it's done in a way where we've been told that it's for our benefit, it's for our better judgment, but it's basically a modern day inquisition, this censorship. And so at the moment we have this barrage, overwhelming predictive programming with overwhelming censorship. But predictive programming doesn't have to be films and zombies and ET contact. It's in our news, mainstream news, it's everywhere. I mean, mainstream news is a form of predictive programming because it's often trying to elicit an expected reaction. And just this week, for example, when the news comes out in America because of the events of the death there, of the police beating, you know, before the news came out, there was this news announcement saying, we're going to release the video, but, you know, we warn people, don't, you know, try not to react to it too strongly. You're going to find it distasteful, which it was, of course. You're going to find, you know, we warn you not to respond or react too strongly to it, which, of course, is a way of predictive programming saying, we're expecting you to react to it because that's plays into the narrative. So a lot of news is deliberately reactive or based around expected emotional triggers and responses because, again, it feeds into predictive programming. So I'm sure that, you know, I'm speaking to you know, a group that understands this. You know, we're all speaking to the converted. It's just that we have to remind ourselves of this, that this programming can be very obvious or it can be more subliminal, but it's happening all the time. Is that the predictive programming in news and newspapers and magazines, and not just the huge big films or other way, and music as well. I mean, it's always there. So basically we are in a reality which is trying to establish a narrative, and so the reality is trying to endeavor for us to have a certain reaction to what we receive, and so then we actually contribute and often sustain and reinforce the same narratives. So that was on my mind actually after watching the series The Last of Us the other day. So I thought I would share that with you. So as always, thanks for listening, and I'll see what's on my mind for next. I haven't really gone away totally yet, and this is a first that I've done in the perspective chats by coming back with an update on the end of a video. And I was just about to format and process the video I've just talked about on the memes and Prophesizing Media. And I wanted to give a quick update because last night I attempted to watch the second episode in the series that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the Last of Us series. And although I have to say the series is very well made with high production values, I have to say that after about 20 minutes or so, I just had to stop it. And the reason is because I find myself more sensitive to these type of topics. Now, whereas before I could watch these films and series, as I have done, mainly for looking out for memes and looking out to see how certain ideas are propagated in these media forms, you could say part of the homework to scan transmission in the popular media. But now I find it difficult to accept this type of programming, even when I'm doing homework, as I call it. And I think part of that is because obviously they're in the program, in the series, they're using certain emotional energies such as fear, with the music and the way that they style it. You know, these people going into claustrophobic fallen buildings where you know there's danger, you know that there's, you know, some infected person there with the virus that's going to trying to attack them. And there's this build-up of fear, anxiety, and although these emotions have always been used in popular media to engage the audience, I find that I'm personally more sensitive to it, and I also find that it's quite an overload, and I think it's an overload because there's just an onslaught, an overwhelming barrage of these type of films and programs about infected people, viruses, and etc. As I've talked about in the previous video, all these dystopian memes, and also how they're putting us into the audience into an agitated emotional state, and I find that more obvious now, or more, I wouldn't say obvious to me, it was always obvious, but I mean, I think the energies are less subtle. And I think also the reason why perhaps I'm more sensitive to it is because I'm, as I've talked about, I've disengaged with these energies as they're getting lower and lower vibrational energies, because, as new energies are coming in, the older energies are obviously trying to keep a hold of people and, pull them into their domain. And so I find I can feel this contestation between engaging with the lower energies now that I'm more detached from them, and I don't want to be there. You have to, each person has to make a choice what they are resonating with. And although I keep doing my homework, as I say, engaging with these transmissions of information and scanning what's out there, I can't stay in that domain for as long as I could have previously. I need to go in and get out quicker now. And I thought it was quite telling, where I just got to a point where I'll watch another minute, and then no, I can't. It's not beneficial to my state, and so I had to turn it off, and I don't think I'll return to it. So I can't give you any more updates on the program. But if anyone actually watches all episodes, or however many they are, 10 or so, you're welcome to give me a summary at the end. But that will obviously have to be a couple of months down the line. Okay, thanks for this update. Well, thanks for bearing with me on this update. Okay, cheers.